Adam Millsap is a senior fellow for economic opportunity issues at Stand Together and is a contributor to Forbes. He writes about state and local policy, urban development, population trends, and labor markets. His writing has also appeared in many national and regional publications, including USA Today, U.S. News and World Report, Real Clear Policy, and The Hill. With a Ph.D. in economics, he teaches at Florida State University, Clemson University, and George Mason University. And Adam is the author of Dayton, The Rise, Decline, and Transition of an Industrial City. And you can find Adam at aamillsap.com. Welcome, Adam. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I've met Steve Forbes several times over the years, and fascinating fellow. You've been writing for Forbes as a contributor over at Forbes, and off the top, what is the feeling right now regarding the zeitgeist we're currently in 2022 with the current economy?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, right? I mean, we just had the new inflation numbers out, 8.5%. It doesn't seem to be like there's any sight that it's going to come down anytime soon. Another variant potentially of COVID coming through. What is the BA2? You lose track of all the different variants. So it'll be interesting to see how the spring and going into summer turns out. Hopefully we see a lot more people getting back out on the road. We see travel pick up, with summer vacations and things like that, despite the inflation. But I think we just have to wait and see how it goes.
You talk about inflation, and one of the things that we hear from the small business community, Adam, is that small business owners are having to make really tough decisions right now. They're especially in restaurant and hospitality, where their margins are already really small. They don't have a lot of room to wiggle. How much of an impact is inflation really having on that community, do you think?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, people have a weird idea, especially people like Elizabeth Warren, have a weird idea about what the profit margins are in most businesses. So you take something like retail or something like the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, pretty competitive industries. You're talking, 2-3% profit margins, if that. And so the idea that they can just eat these costs is just not going to happen, right? It's just not feasible for them. So some of these costs are going to have to be passed on to consumers. And that's always difficult because you have what economists call menu costs, right? It costs money to update your menus, to change prices, to set a different kind of expectation for your customer about what things cost. So you don't want to go into that haphazardly. You want to think really hard about when you're going to do that. But with inflation running as hot as it has been now for the last 5, 6, 7 months, there's just no way that they're going to be able to eat those costs in perpetuity. So we're going to start seeing, I think, more of those costs creeping out into the actual prices that consumers pay when it comes to things like hotel rooms. You're already seeing it with airline tickets, and I think you're going to start seeing it more in the food and beverage industry as well.
It's really interesting. You talk about, the costs. A lot of people don't even see behind, the scenes. When you go sit down at a restaurant, if they've put up a new menu altogether, you got to change that. And then do you allow that price to remain somewhat open because you might have to rise it again in a few months? It's small little things like that. I think the statistic I heard, and you may correct me on this, but something like a third of restaurants actually close their doors, with another maybe 20-30% considering closing their doors because of COVID.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think during the COVID, you saw a huge decrease in the number of restaurants. I mean, I just even noticed that around in Northern Virginia, where I work and where I used to live before I got out during the pandemic. But you saw a lot of restaurants closing down and just not reopening. I mean, there's a transition cost to trying to reopen once you've been shut down for a while, getting people back on board when it comes to staff, getting your suppliers back, ordering food again, getting all the storage ready. So, I mean, like I said, the restaurant industry, I've worked in the restaurant industry, never owned a restaurant, but back in my younger days, I worked in, and it's just notoriously competitive and a tough industry to survive in. So things like the pandemic and now inflation just wreak havoc there and make it very difficult for a lot of these small businesses and these smaller entrepreneurs to maintain competitive prices, maintain a workforce, and then not upset their consumers all at the same time.
We're also seeing big cost increases in fuel and energy and the like. Most recent, and this is being recorded on the 19th of April. So, news changes every day. But most recently, we're seeing that oil prices may have ticked down just a tad because there's zero demand coming out of one of the world's largest cities, and that's Shanghai, where they have completely shut everything down. Do you see that having an impact? Is there a domino, effect on that worldwide? What's happening right now, as far as the supply chain or anything else in regards to Shanghai?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime a city as big as Shanghai shuts down, you're going to start seeing some repercussions, right? I don't know about the I don't know about the exact industrial makeup of places like Shanghai. I know it's kind of also the financial center of China. I don't know what the manufacturing output of Shanghai is. If that's a huge contributor to it. But certainly, if you don't got people even showing up to the corporate offices who are helping to make those decisions, those logistics decisions about when the factories are running, when the factories are shutting down, changing out equipment, changing over the supply lines. If people aren't there able to make those decisions and do the sign-offs, it doesn't also matter that the factory might be located 100 miles away in some other area, right? You can think of the same thing in the U.S. and go back to the heyday of the auto manufacturing back in the 50s and 60s. If Detroit wasn't functioning, I imagine it'd be hard to keep those factories functioning in Ohio and other places in Michigan as well. So I assume there will be some kind of spillover and some kind of effect downstream in the prices that Americans face. We've already seen a shortage and a scarcity of some goods. I know there's a lot of back orders still on things, so I imagine that'll continue and be marginally worse here in the next weeks as the Shanghai shock kind of filters through the rest of the economy.
You're a Ph.D. in economics. You're obviously a professor and well versed in obviously what's going on. My background is also in economics and psychology. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that you can line up 50 economists against a wall and you get 50 different opinions, right?
That's true.
There's a tremendous amount of psychology in economics, isn't there? There's the political bias, there's perspective, there's disposition, but how much of it, of what we're seeing right now is psychological as opposed to actual metrics?
Man, that's a good question. Take inflation, for example. So I was just reading a piece today, right? People talking about whether inflation is unique to America due to the fiscal stimulus and the big government spending during the pandemic, or if it's something that's more global phenomenon in light of COVID-19 and supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine, things like that have an international effect rather than something like Americans' domestic fiscal policy. And two guys that both worked in the Obama administration. You got Jason Furman on one hand saying he thinks the American fiscal response is a contributor to inflation, and then you have Austin Goolsbee, who was his colleague at some point during the Obama administration, who's saying that he doesn't think American fiscal policy had much to do with it, and that's more the global supply chain Ukraine issues. You're absolutely right in the sense that you'll get disagreements like that. There are different perspectives, different ways of thinking about it, different ways of interpreting the data. As far as looking to think about inflation, like consumer expectations, right? I mean, consumers are thinking about now, is inflation going to continue? Should I move purchases up because I think inflation is only going to get worse? Or do I delay and hold things off because I think inflation is going to ameliorate and get better over the next 6 or 7 months? So maybe I don't need that new car right now. I can wait 6 months or I can wait a year and get the new car in 2023. Or vice versa, if you think things are getting worse, then now's the best time to buy the new car because the price is only going to go up. So it's interesting to think about how different people view that scenario, and people will make different decisions based on information.
That's one of the key challenges I think a lot of people have today is actually trying to derive information that doesn't go through a political lens or a bias lens or whatever that may be. But listen, I'm old enough to remember I was a kid living in England, and we moved to the United States in the 1970s. And I remember this word being bandied about when I was 10, 11 years old, and I didn't know what it really meant, but it's now, we're now starting to hear that word again, and it's called stagflation. Are you concerned? Well, first of all, as an economist, define that for us, and are you concerned that is imminent?
Yeah, so stagflation, they talk about the late 1970s, mid 1970s. So the stagflation is periods of high inflation and low or no economic growth. So you simultaneously got inflation and a contraction in the economy, or really, really low levels of growth. Typically during high periods of high inflation, you say the economy is running hot. So that there's a lot of employment, things like that. So you don't really think of it being a recession. The recession only happens once you cool things off and you bring inflation down. That's what happened in the early 1980s when we also had a recession, but that was because Volcker was bringing inflation down by raising the interest rate. Stagflation is a tough one. I mean, I think we could be, and it's only because the Biden administration right now is just doing nothing on the supply side. When you think about what produces economic growth, it's supply side reforms, right? It's low taxes on work and investment. It's regulatory reforms that free up the economy. In this country, things like the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is a big one that prevents construction of all kinds of things, whether it's new housing developments, new roads, new windmills, new solar panels, or new natural gas plants. There's always some way to obstruct here in America. It's becoming too easy to have like a heckler's veto for any kind of project that builds something new. Biden has also had some of the biggest regulatory agendas so far of the last three presidents. So double what Obama did at this point in his presidency, and way more than what Trump did. So I think if we do have stagflation, and we definitely could, it'll be because while we also have this out of control inflation, which I think was partly response of the government during the pandemic, too much money, too big of a fiscal response, we're also having nothing being done on the supply side. And if anything, more obstruction on the supply side, which makes it harder to produce and harder to invest, and harder to get more goods and more services out there in the economy. So I have to say, I am kind of worried about it.
A lot of folks are pointing to this current administration, and whoever's in office obviously always takes the blame. But didn't the spending start long before Joe Biden?
Yeah, so the spending is a side of both parties, right? It's the fault of both parties. So the Republicans have never been good. They talk a good game when it comes to spending when they're not in power, but then when they're in power, they want just as much. They spend it on different things, of course. I mean, the priorities shift, but the spending itself never goes down. So absolutely, the spending is a problem of both parties. The Biden administration really kicked it over the edge, though, with that last CARES Act, that last stimulus act, which even some politicians and some economists in his own camp were saying was going to be much too large, and could lead to inflation.
Summers was one, right?
Yeah, Summers. Furman was also on board with that too. And there was a couple other ones as well saying, listen, just too big of a response for what we have right now.
Yeah. The dreaded R word is making an appearance again. Everybody's talking about recession, maybe third or fourth quarter, maybe well into 2023. Nobody can really predict anything. But what are we looking at right now if a recession hits on the heels of, coming out of this pandemic? What does that look like?
It looks pretty bad. The numbers I've seen right now, we have about maybe a third, 35% forecast of a recession in the next 6 months to a year, which is certainly not good. I mean, 1/3 chance is pretty good, but like you said, how much weight do you want to put on those predictions? I wouldn't put too much on them. But a recession right now would not be good, right? We finally got people coming back a little bit. Travel starting to reopen. The mask mandate just got struck down in court here in America, so you no longer have to wear a mask on airplanes or Ubers and things like that. So I think we can see a robust summer travel season. People still have some money. Prices are, I guess, getting a little out of control, and real wages are falling right now in America, which should definitely have its own problems. But I think there's just enough pent-up demand that people will still be willing to go out and spend some money on travel. But if a recession starts happening and people start actually losing their jobs, it's one thing to have your real wage decline while you still have a job. Like you said, you might think that things are going to get better. This is just a temporary setback. But if people start losing their jobs en masse, which what typically happens during a recession, we see some disruptions in the labor market. I think that'll make things way worse, and we probably will see a lot of unrest, a lot of turmoil. I mean, if that happens before the midterms, I mean, the Republicans are already projected to steamroll the Democrats in the midterms. But if we start getting close to a recession before then, I probably expect even bigger losses for the Democrats.
If we talk about a recession, and again, our focus and our audience's focus is small to medium size, Adam, as far as the business goes, a lot of people are very comfortable, I myself included, just, pressing a button on my phone to order, something from Amazon or whatever it may be. As an economist and from a macro perspective, are you looking at a shift right now to the large big box Amazon, Walmart situations that's been happening for several years? But many small to medium business owners are now complaining that the pandemic has exasperated it, and buying habits may not be returning to what people were previously doing before, where you're focused on the small local business. Is that something that you see and are concerned about?
From a macro perspective, I'm not concerned about it per se. People buy things from the place they think offers the best value. And that's a combination of, price, convenience, selection, variety, and things like that. I don't want to micromanage people's consumer decisions about where they should or should not buy things from. So from a macro standpoint, I'm not too worried. But I do share the concern. I can understand the concern that a lot of small business people have as far as thinking about we might be losing out now even more to the people that can offer, quick delivery, overnight delivery, and those sort of things. The food delivery, although I see a lot of the small restaurants getting on board with the Uber Eats and various things like that to deliver food and have takeout, which is great. Provides a lot more options for consumers and help them stay competitive. And, at some point, the platforms, in the same way that Uber Eats has become a platform basically for restaurants, so whether it's Outback or whether it's your neighborhood cafe, both can use Uber Eats to deliver food, right? In some ways, retail platforms might start being the same way. So the small businesses will have to work through things like Amazon, eBay, or stuff like that to have an online marketplace, Etsy, or whatever else is out there, to have an online marketplace and be able to offer that same kind of convenience and shipping that Amazon currently does with all the other retailers that work through it.
You've written a lot and extensively about entrepreneurship and those folks that make the best entrepreneurs. And, in a time where we're seeing a tremendous amount of the regulatory state ever increasing, which is one of the biggest concerns we're hearing from our clients right now. The number one focus right now for our clients is inflation. But second behind that is regulation and taxes and the like. Tell us a little bit, again, for our audience that is focused primarily on this, one of the things that you see right now with entrepreneurship and the psychology and the zeitgeist that we're currently in right now regarding entrepreneurship and being, self-reliant and focusing on starting up a business, maybe growing a business from scratch. Is that a trend, unfortunately, that is diminishing, or are you seeing otherwise?
I'm terribly worried about the rate of entrepreneurship in America, and the rate of small business growth and new businesses coming online and everything like that. I think that's a huge problem. It's been declining now for decades, though. This is not something new. I think the pandemic exacerbated it a little bit, but American entrepreneurship has been declining for 30, 40, 50 years, since the 80s, I believe, so at least 40 years. And no, I think it's a terrible problem. We're becoming less of a risk-taking country. We're becoming more like Europe. I think of countries like France, and Italy and Spain, right? That slow GDP growth, a lot of just stagnation in the labor market, not a lot of new businesses, a lot of entrenched businesses that have been around for a while. All the regulation raises the fixed costs and makes it more difficult for the new entrant to come in and compete with the big players. And I think that's what's happened in those administrative law countries, like I said, like France, something that America avoided for a long time. But I think we're getting there. And I'm incredibly concerned about the slow rate of business formation in the US. There was a little bump after COVID. We saw a lot more like small businesses and stuff forming and stuff like that. So maybe COVID reignited people's entrepreneurial spirit after being cooped up in their homes or wanting to set out on their own and get away from their employer. And now that things have become slightly more flexible. So we might see a resurgence, but with the low levels of immigration that we're seeing, immigrants tend to start a lot more new businesses than natives proportionally. We're seeing immigration into America. The country's aging. This is a problem you see not only in America and Western Europe, but also Japan. Older people are just more risk averse and tend to be less entrepreneurial, right? So you need kind of a good portion of your population has to be in that medium middle, the 35 to 44-year-olds who tend to start a lot of the successful businesses that end up hiring employees. And we're kind of aging out of that demographically. So I think it's a huge problem. And I think both regulation and some other factors like the aging of the population have something to do with it. Unfortunately, it's going to be much harder to fix the aging of the population, right? I'd love to see more kids in America and more immigrants, and let's get a little bit younger. I'd love to have a more younger dynamic country. But certainly on the regulation side, there's a lot the government can do. I don't think the Biden administration has the appetite for it, but there's still something we can do as long as we have the will.
You teach at different colleges. What are you hearing right now from that generation, my son's generation, Generation Z, I think they're called, in regards to this?
Yeah, so I haven't taught in a couple of years. But when I did teach, and I have several friends that are still professors and are actively teaching. I think unfortunately, what I hear is that most young people are really into the nonprofit entrepreneurship, right? They all want to go out there and start something, but it's all about starting something that's nonprofit. In a way, capitalism, profit have become bad words on a lot of college campuses. The idea of business as a force for good is not as popular as I think it was 30 or 40 years ago. So when people think, how am I going to solve a problem? They immediately say, oh, I need to do a nonprofit. That's the way you solve a problem. But that's just not true. Businesses are problem solvers. That's what entrepreneurs do, or they solve problems. And profit itself is a sign that you're solving the problem efficiently, that people are willing to pay more for whatever good or service you're offering than what it costs you to produce it. If you can't do that in the long run, then you're not sustainable. So I would love to see young people more excited about business as a force for good, more excited about markets, market tested innovation, as we like to call it, right? Not only do you want to produce something new and exciting, but you want it to pass a market test such that people are actually willing to pay for it. So I think we need more of that kind of thinking among young people. And unfortunately, I don't think they're getting it on a lot of college campuses today.
Well, we'll come to our last minute here, Adam, and I greatly appreciate your time. Let's finish on something positive. What opportunities do you see, as far as the economy goes, the future, industries, anything that you're looking at right now that you're excited about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as much as pessimism is going around, I think technology is getting better all the time. I think the mRNA vaccines during COVID were a huge breakthrough. You're hearing people talk about those as ways to cure cancer and malaria and all kinds of other diseases that we haven't had vaccines for in a long time. I think on the energy front, we're seeing a lot of cool innovations with nuclear energy and the small modular reactors. Possible way to make the economy more green, without sending us all back to the Stone Age, like some of the environmentalists want to do. So I'm excited about the energy front. I'm not as excited about Web3 as some people, but other people are really excited about the blockchain and the NFTs and the DAOs. So maybe there's something there that I'm missing, but I know that's a space that if you're young, you might want to check out a little bit. But I do think there's reason for optimism in those industries and others, and that even though things kind of look somewhat bleak now with the high inflation, maybe there's a recession on the forefront. We got war in Ukraine. We're dealing with the fallout in China with the COVID and Shanghai. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic too going forward. I mean, technology is better today than it's ever been. People are really interested in solving problems. I think you have a lot of good people out there who are trying to solve big problems, thinking hard about big problems. So I definitely think there's still a will and an appetite to get things done, to take these moonshots. And hopefully that portion of the world, that portion of America at least, can keep pushing forward despite some of the obstructions that others put in the way.
Well, I will agree with that. And anybody that wants to check out DeFi, decentralized finance, I think that's a very exciting thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's another one.
Yeah. Well, Adam, remind everybody where they can find you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Adam Millsap. I'm on Twitter, AA_Millsap. I'm on LinkedIn, Adam Millsap. And then you can find me, like I said, on Forbes. So yeah, just if you Google my name, I'll pop up.
Greatly appreciate you taking the time, and a great perspective. And we must have you back on again down the road. Thanks so much for your time.
I love that. Thanks a lot for having me.
Take care.